The gavel had barely hit the wood when the air in the courtroom shifted. A heavy silence fell over the room, thick with tension, as the officer's boot connected brutally with the figure on the ground. The sound of the impact echoed against the walls, a chilling crack that sent a shockwave through those who bore witness. The officer, tall and imposing, didn't even hesitate. His expression was one of cold authority, the same smug indifference he had worn 1,000 times before. To him, this was routine, another body to shove out of his way, another voice he could silence with violence. "Get the hell down now," his voice thundered, dripping with condescension and unchecked rage. "You don't belong up here. You hear me? You don't interrupt court proceedings. You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't get in my way." The judge gasped, body recoiling from the pain, hands pressing against the polished courtroom floor for support. The humiliation burned hotter than the pain itself. The room was packed, attorneys, journalists, onlookers, and defendants, but not a single soul moved. Not a single hand was extended to help. Some looked away, uncomfortable but complicit. Others watched with wide eyes, too shocked or too afraid to intervene. The system had taught them well. Power belonged to men like him. The officer sneered, standing over the judge, towering like a shadow, exuding dominance. To him, the person on the ground was nothing, just another lesson in authority delivered the only way he knew how, through force. "You people never learn," he muttered under his breath. "You act like you run things, like you have a say. But in here, in my court, you're nothing." A murmur spread through the courtroom, an uneasy ripple of disbelief. Some clutched their mouths, others whispered in hushed tones. But no one stepped forward. The humiliation was absolute, pressing down, stitched into every breath taken. Fists clenched, grounding against the pain. Not out of fear, no, not fear. This was something else, something deeper, something brewing. Then the unexpected happened. Slowly, deliberately, the judge rose. A hand on the desk, lifting up, standing tall. Taller than the shame, taller than the pain, taller than the weight of centuries pressing against the spine. Eyes locked onto the officers. He scoffed. "You want to go again?" he taunted, flexing his fingers as if preparing for another blow. "I'll put you back down where you belong." But this time, he wasn't in control. This time, his words wouldn't matter. This time, the lesson would be his to learn. Because the person before him wasn't just anyone in that courtroom. Not a spectator, not a protester, not some bystander to be tossed aside. No, this was the judge. And the moment that realization hit, the color drained from his face, like ink spilling across a blank page. His arrogance wavered, his confidence cracked. The court murmured again, but this time, the sound was different, louder. A current of electricity ran through the room, a collective breath held in anticipation. Because this wasn't over. This was only the beginning. Chin tilted, robe straightened, a step forward. When the judge spoke, the voice did not tremble, did not waver, did not crack beneath the weight of injustice. The words cut through the space between them like a blade. "You just assaulted a judge in their own courtroom. Tell me, officer, do you know what the penalty for that is?" His lips parted, but no sound came. His chest rose and fell in rapid succession, panic creeping into his features. He tried to step back, to regain control, to salvage whatever authority he thought he had. But it was slipping. All of it. Because now, the tables had turned. Now, the gavel was in someone else's hands. Now, the rules had changed. And now, he was the one who would learn his place. The courtroom bristled with anticipation. The realization hit all at once. Something irreversible had just happened. Justice was coming. But how far would it go? What would happen to the officer who had so carelessly wielded his power, never once believing it would turn against him? Would he be fired? Arrested? Would he beg for mercy the same way so many others had begged before him? Or would this story end in a way no one could have predicted? One thing was certain. He thought he was untouchable. But now, he was the one on trial. The officer swallowed hard. "Aye! Remove yourself from my courtroom," the judge commanded, voice steady. His head jerked back slightly. "I don't take orders from you." 1. The word rang out like a countdown, a shuffle in the gallery. A ripple of tension so thick it nearly suffocated the room. The officer glanced toward his colleagues standing at the back, waiting for them to intervene, to back him up, to remind him that he wasn't supposed to be in this position. But they didn't move. 2. The shift in power was tangible now, the ground beneath his feet tilting. For years, he had been the one commanding the room. He had been the one dictating the rules. No one had ever counted down for him before. His nostrils flared, hands curled into fists, a last, desperate attempt to hold on to the illusion of control. "I'm a police officer." 3. Silence. The officers in the back hesitated just for a second before one of them stepped forward. "Come on." The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of inevitability. Jaw clenched, lips pressed into a thin line. His face flushed red with something ugly. Humiliation, rage, something too bitter for him to swallow. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had spent years making sure this would never happen. And yet, here he was. His movements were stiff as he turned, forced himself to walk toward the exit, shoulders squared, posture rigid. But everyone could see it. They could see the way his hands twitched at his sides, the way his jaw clenched too hard, the way he fought to keep the last remnants of his crumbling power intact. The doors swung open, the officers led him out, the whispers followed him like a shadow. The judge remained standing, exhaling slowly. The room still bristled with tension, the echoes of what had just occurred lingering in the air like smoke after a fire. And then, just as the courtroom was about to settle, the doors opened again. Another officer stepped in. Higher rank. Command presence. The kind that made people stop and listen. A shift in energy, a renewed sense of unease, a different kind of tension. The officer's voice was too calm, too measured. "There's been a request for an immediate review of the situation." The judge didn't react outwardly, but inside, the understanding settled in, because men like that officer didn't just fade away. They fought, they clawed, they tried to twist the system to protect them one last time. And now, the real battle was about to begin. The air felt thick as the high-ranking officer took another step forward, the gleam of his badge catching the overhead light. His gaze was unreadable, but his presence carried a clear message. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The judge, steady as stone, met his gaze without flinching. "I assume that's not a request." A small, almost imperceptible smirk flickered at the officer's lips. "No, Your Honor, it isn't." A murmur rolled through the courtroom like a coming storm. The spectators knew this moment mattered. It was more than one man's humiliation, more than one officer's downfall. It was the system itself standing at a crossroads. Would it protect its own? Would it bend under the weight of its own corruption? Or would justice, for once, remain unshaken? The judge let the silence stretch, heavy with meaning, before finally speaking. "Very well." The tension in the room coiled tight, a breath held in collective anticipation. Then, the judge did something unexpected. He turned toward the court reporter. "Record this as an official statement. A police officer assaulted a judge in a court of law. Any attempts to obstruct, delay, or manipulate this process will be considered contempt and obstruction of justice. I will personally see to it that accountability is served." The officer's smirk faltered. A sharp intake of breath from someone in the gallery. A shifting of weight from the officers in the back. The balance of power had changed, and now the entire room felt it. "Proceed," the judge commanded, eyes locked on the officer before him. "Let's see how deep this rot goes." The officer held his ground for a moment longer, but it was different now. The game had changed, and for the first time, the ones who thought they controlled everything were about to answer for it. Justice wasn't just coming, it had arrived.